Dallas. 4 in the morning. A city that never fully sleeps, just breathes slower in the dark. 34 floors above the street, one window is still lit. Inside, a woman sits alone at a desk the size of a boardroom table. No music, just a single lamp, a stack of papers, and silence. She is not reading reports tonight. She is reading a letter. 4 pages, handwritten. The kind of handwriting that starts careful and gets looser by the 3rd page, like the person writing it stopped pretending somewhere along the way. She reads it once, fast, then again. Slow, she sets it down. She looks out the window at the city below for a long time. Then she opens her laptop, and she books a seat on a flight she was never supposed to be on, under a name nobody will recognize. Because tomorrow morning, the woman who owns one of the most powerful airlines in America is going to sit in coach. And nobody on that plane will know who she is. Until they do. She built an airline from nothing, and the morning she sat in one of her own seats as a regular passenger. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody except the people who were about to find out. She almost didn't read the letter. It had been sitting on her desk for 11 days. Buried under quarterly reports, under route expansion proposals, under a stack of maintenance compliance reviews that nobody enjoyed but everybody needed to sign before the month closed. 11 days. And then on a Monday night at 10 past midnight, Serena Vale picked it up. The office had finally gone quiet. Dallas sat 34 floors, below bright and indifferent. She opened the envelope. She read it once, fast, then again. Slow. The letter was 4 pages. Written on lined notebook paper, drugstore kind. $2 for 100 sheets. The handwriting was neat at the top of the 1st page and got looser by the 3rd. Like the writer had started composed and somewhere along the way stopped performing composure. His name was Leonard Moore, 72 years old. 14 years flying Clearway Airlines. He had never filed a formal complaint before. He said that 3 times, 3 different ways. As if he needed her to understand that he was not the kind of man who complained. Then he described what had happened 6 weeks earlier. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Gate D7, Flight CW 1887 to Portland. He had been asked to step aside for additional verification. Not once, 4 times, 4 separate requests, over 40 minutes, while every other passenger walked through without a second glance. While the line moved and the jet bridge filled and the door got closer to closings, he missed the flight. His daughter had been waiting in Portland. She had taken the day off work. He had stood at Gate D7 for 40 minutes answering questions in the careful, measured way that a 72-year-old black man learns to explain himself in public spaces, knowing that the cost of impatience is always paid by him and never by the person making him wait. And then they closed the door. The letter ended with one sentence. I have been flying for 40 years, and I have never gotten used to that feeling. Serena set the letter down. She looked out the window for a long time, then she opened her laptop. She booked a seat on Flight CW 1887. Dallas to Seattle, departing the following Tuesday at 8:15 in the mornings, 6 days away, enough time to prepare. Enough time to say nothing to anyone about what she was doing or why. Not under Vale, under Whitaker, her mother's maiden name. The name her mother had carried for 61 years before she married Raymond Vale and moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and started teaching 4th grade at the local public school. Serena M. Whitaker, no title, no executive directory listing, nothing connecting that name to the corner office on the 34th floor. She did not call Derek Osey. Her chief of staff would be in at 6:30, as always. She would tell him then, not what she was doing or why. Just that she had a Tuesday flight, and he shouldn't schedule anything before noon. Derek would know not to ask why. He always knew. She closed the laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and for the first time in weeks, she went home at a reasonable hour. Because she had 6 days to think about what she was walking into, and she intended to use them. She had grown up understanding 2 things at the same time. That she could do anything, and that the world would not make it easy. These were not contradictions. Her mother had taught her that. Not with speeches, with behavior. With the way she drove 40 minutes each way to the county library to find books about people who looked like them doing things the world said they couldn't. With the way she showed up to school every single day in pressed clothes and polished shoes, because she understood that presentation was armor and armor was not vanity. Her father had taught it differently. Raymond Vale was a welder. He worked in a yard outside by Birmingham that smelled like metal and burnt rubber. He came home every evening with hands cracked from heat and clothes stiff dust. He was not a man who talked much. But when he did, it counted. He told Serena once, when she was 9 years old and furious about something she couldn't even name now, "The world has opinions about you that have nothing to do with you. Don't spend your energy arguing with those opinions. Spend it building something they can't survive." She hadn't fully understood it at 9. She understood it by 36. She had applied to 6 commercial airlines, commercial pilot's license before her 21st birthday, flight hours and test scores that put her in the top third of her graduating cohort at Embry-Riddle. She had done everything correctly, everything that was supposed to matter. 2 interviews, no offers. She watched classmates with weaker records get hired in the first round. She saw it clearly, in real time, without any real ambiguity about what she was seeing. She did not file a complaint. She did what her father told her to do. She built something the opinions couldn't survive. Clearway Airlines began with 4 aircraft, 6 routes, and a 130-page business plan she had been writing and revising for 2.5 years. The lead investor, a man named Harold Greenfeld, who had funded aviation ventures for 2 decades, told her it was the cleanest plan he had ever seen. He wrote the check the same day. That was 7 years ago. Clearway now operated 44 aircraft across 61 routes. Annual revenue had crossed $1.8 billion the previous fiscal year. 3 consecutive years in the top 3 for on-time performance. And on Serena's desk, every week, there were more letters. Like Leonard Moore's. Quiet letters, single-page letters. Letters from people who had spent their whole lives learning when to speak and when to let it go, and who had finally, after one more incident, decided to write it down. She had read every one. She had also read the internal responses, the form apologies, the training reminders, the closed cases. The same employee names appearing in 3 incidents. 5, 7, across 12 months. And every case resolved with paperwork that used the same phrases rearranged into slightly different sentences. She had asked Derek 3 months ago to pull the full complaint data, sort by employee, sort by route, flag any name appearing more than twice in a calendar year. The list was longer than she had wanted it to be. Flight CW 1887 Tuesday, Gate D7, one name appearing 4 separate times in 14 months. Frank Alden. She kept that name in her head as she packed her bag the night before. 1 carry-on, a leather tote, a slim portfolio that went everywhere with her, dark navy blazer over a cream blouse, flat shoes, 1 ring, her grandmother's. No watch. Nothing that would read as anything other than a woman traveling on business who didn't feel the need to announce it. Because that was exactly what she was, just not the business anyone would expect. She found the executive lounge at 6:15 in the morning. She did not use the private entrance. She stood in the regular line, handed over her boarding pass like everyone else. Walked in when the door opened. The woman at the front desk was young, 26, dark eyes, natural hair. Name tag, Amara. She looked up when Serena came in and smiled, not the professional kind that lives in the teeth and goes no further. The real kind, the one that reaches the eyes. "Good morning. Flying out early?" "Trying to," Serena said. "Long day ahead?" "We'll see." Amara nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. "Can I get you anything?" "We just put out breakfast." "Black coffee, if it's not too much trouble." "Never is." She brought the coffee in 2 minutes. Set it down without ceremony. Asked if Serena needed anything else, and when Serena said no, she went back to her desk and left her alone. That was it, the whole interaction. But Serena sat in that corner for 20 minutes watching Amara work. Watching her greet 6 other passengers in same window of time. Watching her retrieve someone's coat from the rack without being asked. Quietly directing an elderly couple to the quieter section without making it feel like a direction. She treated every single person who walked through that door the same way, like they belonged there, like it wasn't even a question. Serena reached into her portfolio and found a small piece of paper. She wrote down a name, Amara Wells. She had read the full name from the desk badge. 6 a.m. shift, executive lounge, concourse D. She folded the paper, put it in her jacket pocket. Some people deserve to be remembered. And she had learned a long time ago that the people who deserved it most were often the ones nobody was writing down. Boarding for flight CW887 began at 7:40. Serena stood in the first-class line at gate D7, 8 passengers ahead of her. 7 walked through without a pause. Quick scan, green light, have a good flight, moving on. The 8th passenger was an older black man with a cane. He was dressed carefully, pressed slacks, a brown vest over a button-down shirt, shoes that had been polished that morning. He walked with the measured gait of someone whose hip had been giving him trouble for a while, but who had decided not to let it show. He handed his boarding pass to Frank Alden. The scanner beeped green. Frank Alden looked at the screen, looked at the man, looked at the screen again. "Sir, can you step to the side for just a moment? Is there a problem?" "Just a routine verification. Won't take long." The man stepped aside, without argument, with the patience of someone who had done this before. She had his name from the complaint file. Leonard Moore, 72 years old, 14 years of flying Clearway. The man who had written 4 pages on notebook paper and mailed them to a company that had disappointed him before. Serena stood in line and watched. Frank Alden waved the next passenger through, and the next. The line moved, the jet bridge filled. Leonard Moore stood beside the counter with his cane in his hand and his carry-on at his feet, waiting for a verification that kept requiring more questions the longer it went on. Her turn came. Frank scanned her boarding pass, green. He looked at the screen. Typed something. The scanner didn't need typing. Looked up at her, back at the screen, then said, "1 moment," and typed something else. 30 seconds, then. "Have a good flight." Flat. No eye contact. Serena walked down the jet bridge. She did not look back. She wanted to. She thought about it with every step. She thought about turning around, walking back up, standing next to Leonard Moore and making it stop. She had the authority. She could have ended it in 40 seconds. But that wasn't why she was here. She was here because this kept happening. And nobody above the level of a form letter had ever done anything about it. She was here because the picture needed to be complete. Because partial understanding led to partial solutions, and partial solutions were just a slower version of standing still. She had to see it all the way through. She kept walking. At the door of the aircraft, the lead flight attendant was waiting. Her name tag read Gloria. Early 50s, blonde hair in a tight bun, lipstick the dark red of dried wine. She had been watching the jet's bridge. When the couple in front of Serena came through the door, she stepped forward with a full smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Harlan. So glad to have you with us." The Harlans passed, the smile passed with them. By the time Serena stepped through the door, Gloria Tate's face had rearranged itself into sunk flatter. Something that took Serena in from collar to shoes and made a quiet judgment in the space of 2 seconds. Boarding pass, not welcome aboard, not good morning, just boarding pass. Serena handed it over. Gloria looked at it. Looked at Serena. Looked at it again. "You're in 2A? The boarding pass says 2A. A pause brief. But deliberate, of course, right this way. She walked Serena to the seat with the energy of someone doing a favor they hadn't agreed to. The walk said, "I'm doing my job." It did not say welcome. Serena sat down in 2A, stowed her tote in the overhead, slid her portfolio under the seat in front, buckled her seatbelt, did not look around. The man in 2B had boarded before her. He looked to be in his mid-60s, well-worn but not diminished, gray at the temples, a jacket that was good quality and had been for a long time. He had a Travels magazine open on his lap and was reading it with the focused attention of a man trying not to think about something else. When Serena sat down, he glanced over, a small nod, reflexive. Then he looked back out the window. His name she didn't yet know was Roy Dunbar. The cabin filled around them. Serena watched it the way her father had taught her to watch things. Quietly, without announcing the watching. The couple in 1A and 1B spoke in the comfortable shorthand of people married long enough to have their own language. The man in 1C hadn't looked up from his phone since boarding, and probably wouldn't until they were over New Mexico. In 3A, a young woman settled in with the practiced efficiency of someone who flies every week and has stopped finding any of it interesting. Gloria started the pre-departure beverage service. Row 1, champagne for 1A, champagne for 1B, full glasses, warmth that transformed her face. Row 2, champagne for 2B. Roy accepted it with a brief nod without looking up. Gloria reached to 2. She did not make eye contact. Water? Just that. Not "Can I get you something to drink?" Not would you like champagne, just water, as if it were the obvious association. Serena looked at her steadily. I'll have what everyone else is having. Champagne, please. A pause. Not long, but there. Of course. Gloria came back with a glass of champagne. She set it on the tray with a small, precise click. The glass was smaller. Not dramatically. Not in any way that could be pointed at directly and named without sounding like an overreaction. Just smaller, a third less. The kind of difference that could be a mistake and wasn't. Serena looked at the glass, picked it up, took one small sip, set it back down. Then she opened her portfolio, slid out a single sheet of paper, placed it face down on top of the closed portfolio, rested her hand lightly over it. And she waited. In 2B, Roy Dunbar turned a page of his magazine without reading it. In 3A, the young woman, Simone Reeves, 28 years old, civil rights attorney, flying back to Seattle after a week of depositions in Dallas, had already begun paying attention. She had noticed the boarding pass exchange at the door. She had noticed the glass. She was tired. She had planned to sleep the whole way there. She reached to the seat pocket in front of her, took out her phone, set it on her tray table, angled it slightly, casual, unassuming. She pressed record. 12 minutes passed. Then Gloria Tate came back up the aisle from the rear galley, tablet in hand, the look of someone who had been thinking about something and made a decision. She stopped at row 2. Excuse me, ma'am. I'm so sorry to bother you. Could I see your boarding pass again? Serena looked up. Of course. She reached into her jacket pocket and handed it over without hurry. Gloria looked at the boarding pass, looked at her tablet, looked at the boarding pass again. The motion was deliberate, performative in its slowness. In 2B, Roy had gotten still. He wasn't reading anymore. He was doing the thing people do when they want to observe without appearing to observe. The slight stiffening of the posture, the eyes that aren't quite looking but aren't quite not looking either. There seems to be a discrepancy in our system, Gloria said. Her voice was calibrated, loud enough to carry to 1D and 2C, soft enough to sound concerned rather than accusatory. Seat 2A is showing as unassigned on my manifest. Serena kept her voice even. The boarding pass shows 2A. The gate agent scanned me through. The seat is mine. Understand, ma'am, but the internal manifest is what governs the cabin. If the system shows the seat as unassigned, I need to verify how you came to be in it. You can verify it by looking at the boarding pass you're currently holding. Something tightened at the corner of Gloria's mouth. Not much, enough. I'm going to need to ask you to step out of the seat while we sort this out. Serena did not move. I won't be doing that. I purchased this seat. I checked in for it. I was issued a boarding pass and scanned through the gate. If there is an error in your internal system, that is something your airline needs to resolve. It is not a reason for me to give up a seat I paid for. Gloria straightened, tucked the boarding pass into the front pocket of her tablet case, not handing it back, keeping it. I'm going to need to speak with the captain. That's your right. I'll remain here. Gloria walked forward toward the cockpit. The cabin had gone quiet. Not all at once, one row at a time. The couple in 1A and 1B had stopped talking. The man in 1C had put his phone down. The woman in 3A, Simone, had kept her own posture still. Phone on the tray, still recording, still watching, and in 2B, Roy Dunbar set his magazine down, not on purpose. His hands just stopped doing what they were supposed to do, and the magazine ended up flat Lass's lap, and he sat there with it under his palms and looked at the space in front of him. He had 34 years in corporate management. He knew how organizations worked and how they didn't. He knew what was happening in row 2. He also had 34 years of practice with a very precise and very cowardly skill, the ability to look at something clearly, and then look somewhere else. He looked at his magazine. He looked at it with the kind of effort that is almost athletic. The concentration required to sit 3 inches from a woman being questioned over a boarding pass she had already shown twice, and maintain the posture of a man reading about aircraft innovations in a travel publication was considerable. He managed it. He was very good at it. He told himself the things that 34 years of careful corporate survival had made available to him in exactly these moments. That it wasn't his business, that he didn't know what was actually happening, that someone else would say something, that interfering might make it worse. He sat there. He said nothing. Captain Hal Briggs came through the cockpit door 90 seconds after Gloria went in. 57 years old, broad through the shoulders, iron gray hair, the 4 gold stripes of a senior captain. He walked with the certainty of a man who had spent decades being the final authority in every room he entered. Not fast, not slow, certain. He stopped at row 2. He looked at Serena, only at Serena. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Briggs. I understand there's been a concern about your seat assignment." "There's no concern about my seat assignment," Serena said. "There appears to be an error in your manifest. Those are 2 different things." Briggs's jaw moved slightly, the motion of a man recalibrating faster than he let on. "What I need from you right now is to come with me to the jet bridge so we can sort this out without delaying the flight." "I'm not delaying the flight, Captain. I'm sitting in my seat. You are delaying the flight by standing in the aisle. The fastest resolution is for your colleague to return the boarding pass she's been holding for 4 minutes and for boarding to continue." A muscle moved in the side of Briggs's neck. He glanced at Gloria. Gloria gave a small, nearly invisible shake of her head. The kind that passes between 2 people who have already agreed on the outcome and are now only performing the discussion. Briggs looked back at Serena. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time," and then the man in seat 2D stood up. He was 69 years old, slim, a gray suit that had been good once and aged honestly. He had a hardcover book in one hand. He had the unhurried quality of someone who had somewhere in the last 60 seconds finished a calculation and decided the math was simple. "Excuse me, Captain." Briggs turned. "My name is Arthur Fielding. I've flown somewhere north of 3.8 million miles on this airline. I've been sitting here since before boarding started, and I've watched the last 7 minutes of this exchange." He paused. Not for drama, just because he was choosing words. This woman has done nothing wrong. She has been calm, precise, and fully cooperative. "And I would like to know why your colleague did not ask to see my boarding pass a second time. Or anyone else's." The cabin was completely still. "Sir," Briggs said, "please sit down." "I'll sit down," Art Fielding said. "But I want my objection noted, and I'd like the young woman recording this to please keep going." He didn't look at Simone when he said it. He didn't need to. He sat down, picked up at his book, did not look at Serena. He had said what he stood up to say. Roy Dunbar in 2B was staring at his magazine. He had heard every word Art Fielding said. He had watched an older man stand up in the narrow space between his seat and the cabin wall and say, without performance, without calculation of what it would cost him, "This is wrong, and I will not pretend otherwise." Roy had not stood up. His hands were flat on the magazine cover. He did not move them. Briggs looked at Serena again. His voice dropped a register. "I don't know who you think you are, ma'am, but on this aircraft, I am the final authority." "I understand that." "Good. Then you understand why I need you to get out of that seat." "I understand your authority, Captain. I'm questioning your basis for exercising it. Under federal regulation, an air carrier may refuse transport only for specific enumerated reasons. I'm asking you to tell me which one applies to me right now." Something shifted behind Briggs's eyes. Not understanding. "Not yet. Something earlier than that. You are interfering with the duties of a flight crew member. I am sitting in a seat. I have not raised my voice. I have not stood up. I have not refused a single safety instruction. One beat. Every device currently recording this interaction will reflect exactly that." Briggs's face went the color of something cooling too fast. He turned to Gloria. "Call ground security." Gloria lifted the interphone from the bulkhead. Serena looked at Briggs for one steady moment. Then she lifted her hand from the paper that had been resting on her closed portfolio since before the champagne was served. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She turned the paper over and slid it forward on the tray table, far enough that Briggs, stands 12 inches away, could read it without leaning. Single page. Clearway Airlines letterhead, a printed memorandum dated 3 days prior, subject line, Quad-Fleet Operations Review, Executive Directive Q3. In the middle of the page, a list of names. Captain Harold Briggs, pending review. 3 open passenger complaints, per Executive Directive. At the bottoms, a signature, clean, looping, unhurried, Serena Avail, Chief Executive Officer. Briggs read it. He read it again. The color that had been climbing up into his face reversed direction entirely. It drained from the cheeks down, from the jaw, from the corners of his mouth, which had been set in the firm line of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His hand came up, automatic, reaching for the paper, and stopped, midair, because he understood in the same instant that he did not have the standing to take it. He let his hand drop. "Gloria," he said. His voice had changed. Still the shape of authority. The substance was gone. "Cancel security." Gloria had the interphone in her hand. Cancel it. Roy Dunbar in 2B had seen the paper. He could read it from where he was sitting. Not every word, but enough. He read the name at the bottom. And something happened in the space behind his ribs that he couldn't have named cleanly. Not guilt exactly, not shame exactly. Something older than both. The feeling of a man who has spent his whole life believing he would do the right thing when it mattered, and has, in the last 12 minutes, discovered that believing it and doing it are not the same thing at all. He sat very still. The magazine was still in his hands. He didn't feel it. Gloria made the call. Her hand was not steady. She spoke into the interphone in a low, clipped voice, and the tremor underneath it was the sound of someone trying to hold their professional register while the ground shifted. The security officers, who had been on their way down the jet bridge, stopped, turned around, walked back. Briggs was still standing in the aisle. "Miss Vale," he said. The name came out carefully, like a word he'd just learned and wasn't sure he was pronouncing correctly. Serena gave exactly one beat. "Captain Briggs, I'd like you to confirm, for whatever record is being kept, that you requested I leave my assigned sun seat without first verifying the assignment against the central reservation system." He didn't answer right away. "Yeps or no, Captain. Yes, thank you." Her voice stayed level. Not cold, not warm, level. "Please return to the cockpit. We have a flight to run." He turned. He walked forward up the aisle. He didn't look at Gloria as he passed her. He didn't look at the passengers in row 1. He walked through the cockpit door and pulled it closed behind him. The click of it was very small in the quiet of the cabin. Gloria walked to row 2, opened the front pocket of her tablet case, took out the boarding pass. She held it out. Her hand was not steady. Serena took the boarding pass, placed it on top of her portfolio next to the memorandum. She did not say thank you. The absence of it sat in the air between them. Gloria felt it. Of course she did. It was exactly what it was meant to be. The smallest version of the same thing Gloria had been doing to passengers for years. The deliberate withholding of a courtesy. "Gloria, please continue boarding. The main cabin still needs to load." "Yes, Miss Vale." It came out in a voice that didn't sound like Gloria's. Or maybe it was the truest version of her voice she had used all morning. She walked back toward the rear of the aircraft, and Serena sat in seat 2A, and she looked out the window. The jet bridge was still attached. Somewhere on the other side of it, at gate D7, Leonard Moore had either made this flight or hadn't. She didn't know yet. She would find out when they landed. She thought about 4 pages of lined notebook paper, the handwriting that started careful and went looser by the 3rd page. The last sentence, "I have been flying for 40 years, and I have never gotten used to that feeling." She thought about that sentence, and she thought about what she was going to do about it, and she thought, just briefly, about the man in 2B, who had sat beside her for the whole thing, who had heard every word, who had not said one. She didn't look at him, but she was aware of him, his stillness. The magazine that hadn't moved, the set of his shoulders, which had the quality of something being held very carefully. His name, she still didn't know, was Roy Dunbar, and he was not at this particular moment feeling very good about himself. The main cabin finished loading. The jet bridge retracted. The aircraft pushed back from gate D7 at 8:19 in the morning, 4 minutes behind schedule. Captain Briggs's voice came over the intercom for the safety announcement. Steady, professional. The voice of a man performing a role he had held for 29 years with the automatic precision of someone who has said the same words so many times they no longer require thought. Underneath the steadiness, if you were listening for it, was something else. The sound of a career that had just changed shape. Not ended, not yet, but changed. In the way some mornings change things, not with noise, but with a quiet, permanent shift in what is true. The aircraft lifted off over Dallas. Below, the city spread in every direction, highways and rooftops, and the long straight geometry of runways. In 2A, Serena Vale folded the memorandum and placed it back in her portfolio. She closed it, zipped it shut. She placed her hands in her lap, and she looked out the window, and she let the miles go. The flight to Seattle was 4 hours and 12 minutes. Serena knew this because she had flown this route 11 times in the last 2 years, always announced in advance. Always greeted at the door with her title and a glass of champagne the right size. This time she had a smaller glass and a boarding pass someone had tried to take from her. She did not open her laptop. She was not today a woman with a schedule. She was a passenger, just a passenger. And she was going to sit in that for a while. Datyala, the younger flight attendant, came through first class during the climb. Professional, careful, not too warm, not too cold. The calibration of someone who understands a situation has changed but isn't certain how. She had quietly replaced the smaller champagne glass with a larger one at some point during the pushback. No comment. No acknowledgement. Serena had noted it. She had said nothing. Gloria Tate did not return to first class for the remainder of the flight. Serena thought about this, not with anger. Anger would have been easy and beside the point, with attention. The kind that sees a thing clearly rather than emotionally. Gloria had been with Clearway for 17 years. In that time, she had built a career. She had learned the routes, the rhythms, the particular texture of a long-haul first-class cabin. She had, presumably, once wanted this job enough to train for it, to show up for it, to build a life around it. And she had made choices inside that career that nobody above the level of a form letter had ever required her to account for. That was the part, not Gloria specifically. The organization that had received the complaints processed them, resolved them with template language, and moved on. Because moving on was cheaper than changing. Because changing required someone with authority to look at the accumulated result and decide, this is not acceptable. Nobody with that authority had done that. Until now, Serena was going to have to sit with her own place in that. She had run Clearway for 7 years. The complaint files had been there, the pattern had been there. She had not acted at the structural level until she sat in the seat herself. That was not something a public statement could fix. It required something that cost more than a statement. She had known what since somewhere over southern Oregon, when the Cascades appeared below the cloud line, dark and specific and real, and the picture became complete. She unzipped her portfolio, found a pen, found a clean page, and she started writing the statement. Not the draft she had been composing in her head since the jet bridge. The actual words. Because the difference between composing and writing was the difference between a plan and a commitment, and she was ready to commit. She wrote for 2 hours and 6 minutes. By the time 100 announcement came, she had 930 words and a clear sense of what came next. She capped the pen, closed the portfolio, and sat back. Outside the window, Washington appeared below, the Cascades and then the lowlands and then the gray sprawl of the Sound. Seattle from above looked exactly like itself. Specific, particular, the kind of city that doesn't try to be anything other than what it is. She had work to do here. She was ready to do it. In 2B, Roy Dunbar was not reading his magazine. He had not turned a page in 40 minutes. The magazine was on his lap, but technically open. But he was doing something much more uncomfortable than reading. He was sitting with himself. Roy Dunbar had spent 64 years becoming a man who was, by most reasonable measures, a decent person. Loyal husband for 31 years until Patricia passed. A father to his son James, who called every Sunday from Phoenix. 6 years coaching Little League when James was young. He shoveled his neighbor's driveway every winter without being asked. He did not think of himself as someone who looked the other way. And yet, he had been 3 inches from a woman being interrogated over a boarding pass she had already shown twice. And he had looked at a magazine. Art Fielding had stood up. Art Fielding's 69 years old, slim, a gray suit he'd had for years, had put his book down and stood in this narrow space between his seat and the cabin wall and said clearly and without drama to a man with 4 gold stripes on his sleeve, "This woman has done nothing wrong. I want my objection noted." And Roy had looked at his magazine. He could tell himself things he had already started. He could say he didn't know what was actually happening. Could say he didn't want to make it worse. Could say that interfering might have escalated things, might have caused more harm. He stopped. Because he knew. He had known from the moment Gloria came back with the tablet. From the moment the question of the boarding pass became a performance conducted loud enough for the cabin to hear. He had known the way you know things you don't want to know, completely, unavoidably, with a clarity that no amount of magazine reading actually displaces. He had known, and he had sat there. He thought about Rebecca. His daughter was 31 years old. She lived in Seattle and worked as an architect for a firm downtown that she had joined 2 years ago and already outgrown. She was brilliant, in the methodical way of someone who had built her own discipline without being told to. The kind of person who takes something apart to understand it and then puts it back together, correctly, without being asked. She was also black. They had adopted her when she was 3 years old, a process that had taken 2 years and remade both him and Patricia in ways they were still discovering when Patricia got sick. Rebecca had grown up in their house. She was theirs and they were hers without qualification. But Rebecca had told him things over the years. She didn't dwell on them. She would mention something, a cab that had driven past her, to stop for the person behind her, a store clerk who had followed her through 2 aisles, a flight attendant who had asked to see her boarding pass twice when nobody around her was asked once. She mentioned these things the way you mention weather, as conditions of a particular life. Things that happened, not things she expected anyone to fix. Roy had listened. He had made sympathetic noises. And then almost always he had changed the subject. He hadn't known what to do with those stories. That was what he had told himself, that he didn't know what to do. 34 years in corporate management. A man who had navigated board presentations and restructuring announcements and the particular minefield of telling a senior executive that their idea was wrong. He could do hard things. He had done hard things, but he hadn't known what to do with Rebecca's stories. He thought about that now. At 35,000 feet, magazine zine on his lap, a woman in the seat beside him whose boarding pass had been returned without apology. A woman who had known exactly what to say, exactly which regulation applied, exactly how to hold her ground without giving anyone anything to use against her. Art Fielding had stood up. Roy had sat there, and no version of why he'd sat there felt honest enough to hold. He thought, I have a daughter. He thought, she flies. He thought, how many mornings has she sat in someone's seat and been made to feel like she didn't belong there, and come home and mentioned it to me the way you mention weather, and I changed the subject because the subject made me uncomfortable. He thought Art Fielding was 69 years old, 5 years older, hadn't seemed to calculate anything at all, just stood up. Roy looked out the window at the clouds and thought about the 34 years of conference rooms. The meetings where things happened that he'd understood weren't right. Not dramatic things, not things you could point at directly and say, that is wrong, just things. The way an idea got credited to someone else. The way a hire got made for reasons that were never quite articulated. The way a person who should have been promoted was thanked for their patience and passed over. And Roy had seen it and understood it and gone home and not said anything. Because it wasn't his department. Because someone else would surely handle it. Because the cost of speaking was real, and the cost of staying quiet was, what? Nothing he could point at. Just a slow accumulation of small silences that had added up to something he was only now, at 64, beginning to measure. He looked at the back of the seat in front of him. I came here to see my daughter, he thought. When she asks how flight was, I could say fine. I've said fine before. I'm good at fine. He thought, I don't know if I can say fine this time. Art Fielding had his hardcover book open across his knee. He was actually reading now. The book was a history of the American Railroad, dense, specific, the kind of reading that required attention and rewarded it. He had been working through it for 2 weeks, and was near the end, which always produced in him a particular combination of satisfaction and reluctance. He was 69 years old, and he had not planned to say anything on this flight. He had boarded thinking about the drive to the airport and the coffee he'd left unfinished on his kitchen counter and the fact that his sister was picking him up in Seattle and they hadn't seen each other in nearly 2 years. Too long, they both knew it. They were also the kind of siblings who had always required a specific occasion to close the distance that had accumulated between them. Not because they didn't love each other, but because life had a way of filling the space where intention lived. He had not planned to get involved. He was old enough to know that getting involved had costs. He was also old enough to have stopped caring about certain costs. That was one of the few genuine compensations of 69, the arithmetic simplified. You stopped calculating quite so many things and did what seemed right. It had seemed right. The woman in 2A had done nothing in 7 minutes of watching. She had been calm and precise and exactly as firm as the situation required, and not 1 degree more. She had known things about systems, about procedure, about what she was and wasn't entitled to, that a standard passenger doesn't usually know. He had noted that. He had also noted the man in 2B who had said nothing. Art Fielding was not a man who judged easily. He had been in enough situations over enough decades to understand that the reasons people stayed quiet were more complicated than the reasons they should have spoken. Fear, uncertainty, the social cost of disruption, the genuine belief that someone else would handle it. He understood all of that. He also knew that understanding it didn't make any of it sufficient. You could know why someone stayed quiet and still believe they should have spoken. Both things could be true at the same time. He had learned that the hard way years ago in a situation he still thought about occasionally when the light was right, and he had time to be honest with himself. He turned a page. Outside the window, Oregon was behind them. Washington was beginning to appear below, dark green and specific, the Cascades visible even through cloud cover if you knew where to look. He thought about his nephew. Dion was 14 years old and lived in Columbus with Art's sister and her husband. He wanted to build aircraft, not fly them, build them. He had a particular interest in fuel efficiency systems, which Art had not fully understood but had supported unconditionally. 3 Christmases of engineering books, a subscription to an aviation magazine, a scale model kit that had taken them an entire weekend to assemble correctly, and which Dion had disassembled afterward methodically to see how it worked. Dion was the kind of kid who took things apart to understand them. He was also the kind of kid who had already, at 14, learned to be careful in certain rooms. Art had written that sentence in his head before. He had never found a way to finish it that didn't require more honesty than he usually had on offer. What he meant was, Dion had learned the things a black boy in America learns before he was old enough to have chosen to learn them. The calibration, the monitoring of posture, of tone, of how much space to occupy in a given room, the awareness of being watched that sits behind the eyes and never fully rests. Art watched Dion carry that weight with a matter-of-factness that broke his heart a little every time. He thought about Dion when he stood up in row 2. He didn't say so. It wasn't necessary. What was necessary was the standing up. He read his book. The clouds outside shifted and the light changed, and somewhere ahead of them, Seattle was waiting. Simone Reeves had been awake since 4:30 in the morning. She had a deposition in Dallas that had run 3 hours longer than scheduled on Monday, did with opposing counsel that she had endured with professional grace and enjoyment, and a flight home that she had almost rescheduled twice before deciding that another night in a Dallas hotel room would be worse than tired. She was a civil rights attorney, 28 years old. She worked out of a firm in Seattle that handled employment discrimination cases, housing cases, and occasionally kind of police misconduct case that made the news and required her to be composed on camera for longer than felt natural. She was very good at being composed. She had settled into 3A with every intention of sleeping. She had her neck pillow. She had her noise-canceling headphones in her bag. She had a specific plan. And then the woman in 2A had handed over her boarding pass, and the flight attendant had looked at it the way people look at something they've already decided is wrong. Simone knew that look. She had seen it in courtrooms, in offices, in parking lots and restaurants and hotel lobbies and every other space where the same transaction played out in slightly different costumes. She had been on the receiving end of it herself, more times than she kept count of anymore, because keeping count had stopped being useful somewhere around year 3 of her career. She picked up her phone. She set it on her tray table. She angled it slightly. Not obvious, not hidden. Just there, the way a person's phone is just there, on a tray, because people put their phones on trays all the time. She pressed record. She watched the captain come out. She watched Art Fielding stand up. She watched the memoranda get slid across the tray table, and the color leave Hal Briggs's face in one continuous motion, like water draining. She kept recording. When Briggs walked back into the cockpit and the cabin sound slowly returned to normal, Simone looked at her phone screen for a moment. Then she set it face down on her tray and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She was thinking about what she had. Clear audio, steady angle. Every exchange from the moment Gloria came back with the tablet to the moment Briggs said yes and asked to confirm he had not verified the seat assignment. She was also thinking about what she was going to do with it. There was a version of this that went directly to social media. That version would move fast, generate heat, and put the story in someone else's hands before the airline had a chance to respond. She had seen that version play out before, sometimes productively, sometimes not. The speed was a kind of power and also a kind of loss of control. There was another version. She thought about the woman in 2A, who had known the exact regulation, who had asked the captain to confirm his conduct on the record, who had sat with a document under her hand for 45 minutes before she chose to use it. That woman was not improvising. Simone decided to do something careful instead of something fast. She would send the footage directly, through the proper channel, with a cover letter, and she would wait to see what happened next before deciding what came after that. She opened her eyes. Outside the window, the clouds had thickened below them, hiding the ground. Up here, the sky was clean and very blue, the particular blue that only exists above 30 feet, the blue that has no weather in it. She thought. That woman in 2A knew exactly who she was the whole time, she thought. I want to know the rest of that story. The descent announcement came over the intercom. Captain Briggs's voice, steady, professional, giving altitude and conditions and arrival time in the measured cadence of someone performing a role. The words were correct. The voice was correct. Underneath it, if you were listening, was the sound of a reciting lines in a play whose ending had already changed. The wheels came down over the southern edge of Seattle. The aircraft touched the runway at Seattle-Tacoma at 12:41 in the afternoon. 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The deceleration pressed everyone gently forward. The seatbelt sign chimed off. And then the cabin stood up all at once, the way it always does. The collective impatience of people who have been sitting for 4 hours and have said as a single organism that the last 3 minutes are simply not going to be endured seated. Serena stayed where she was. She let the cabin clear in front of her. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched people pull bags from overhead compartments and put on jackets and say things into their phones and massaged the small, complicated logistics of returning to their own lives. The man in 2B stood. Roy Dunbar stood slowly. He reached into the overhead for his carry-on, a simple bag, well-traveled, the kind of person who says until it falls apart because they know exactly how it fits in an overhead bin. He pulled it down. He straightened his jacket. He turned. He turned toward C2A. Serena looked up at him. He had the expression of a man who had spent 4 hours preparing to say something and was now not sure he should. Not because he didn't mean it, because meaning something wasn't the same as knowing whether it was the right thing to offer. He said it anyway. I didn't stand up. The cabin was moving around them, people filing toward the front. The sounds of departure, the shuffling and zipping and murmuring of 100 passengers reassembling themselves. And in the middle of all of it, this. A man in a window seat, standing in the aisle, saying the plainest version of something true. I want you to know that I know that. Serena looked at him, not with anger, not with the satisfaction of someone who has been wronged and wants the person across from them to feel it fully. With something more complicated than either of those things. With the look of a woman who has spent her whole career reading rooms and reading people, and who was reading this one clearly. I know you know, she said. He nodded. Something in his face was working, trying to locate the next sentence. The one that would explain, or contextualize, or account for itself. He found a different one instead. I have a daughter, he said. She lives here, she flies. Serena did not fill the silence that followed. She let sit, which was harder than speaking, but more honest. Then she reached up and took her bag from the overhead. She picked up her portfolio. She stood. Safe travels, Mr. Dunbar, he said. Roy Dunbar, Mr. Dunbar. She stepped into the aisle. She did not look back. But she heard him. Still standing in the space between the seats. Not moving yet. Just standing there with his carry-on in his hand, and the weight of the morning settling around him like something he would be carrying for a while. In 3A, Simone Reeves was already on her feet. She had watched the exchange between 2E and 2B without expression. The professional stillness of someone understands that some moments are evidence and should be witnessed precisely. She had not missed a word. She pulled her bag from the overhead and stepped into the aisle. Efficient, purposeful. She had a plan, and she was already moving toward it. At row 2D, Art Fielding was gathering his book and his small overnight bag when Serena reached him. She paused. He looked up. "Mr. Fielding, Miss Vale, no surprise in it." He had read the memorandum from his angle clearly enough. He had known for a while. "Thank you," she said, "for standing up." Art Fielding looked at her for a moment. He did not rush toward a response. He had the quality of a man who had learned not to hurry toward the next thing. "I have a nephew," he said. 14, his name is Dion. He wants to build aircraft. A pause. "He already knows how to be careful in certain rooms. He learned that before I would have liked him to." Serena held his gaze. "I'd like Dion to enter a field where what happened in this cabin this morning cannot happen to him and the way there," Art said. "That's the whole of it." "Then we're working toward the same thing," Serena said. He inclined his head, the nod of a man who had made his point and didn't need to elaborate on it. She moved forward. At the cabin door, Gloria Tate was standing. It was her job to be there. Standard procedure. The lead flight attendant thanks passengers as they disembark. Gloria had done it thousands in 17 years, and she knew every beat of it. Except that she had had 4 hours and 12 minutes to think about this particular disembarkation. And whatever composure she had rebuilt during that time, it was not making it all the way to her face. The professional smile kept stopping at her cheekbones. Passengers moved past her. She said the right things. She held a partial smile. And then first class was empty, and Serena Vale walked the 6 steps from row 2 to the door. Gloria straightened. Serena stopped, not for effect. Just because she had one more thing to say. "Gloria, Miss Vale, you will receive a notification from Human Resources before close of business today. Administrative leave, pending an independent investigation by an external firm." Gloria's face went through several things at once. The investigation will not be limited to this morning. It will cover a documented pattern. You will have a full opportunity to respond to every finding. Serena kept her voice low. The last passengers moving through the jet bridge behind her couldn't hear. This was not for them. "I want you to understand something." She held Gloria's eyes. "The complaint files on my desk are not abstractions. They are people. A woman in Dallas who was offered water when everyone around her got a choice. A man at this gate who stood at that counter for 40 minutes while his flight left without him. People who wrote letters, received form responses, and eventually stopped writing because the ratio of effort to outcome became too poor." Gloria's mouth had opened slightly. "Your conduct this morning was not an accident, but I am not here only to address your conduct. I am here because this organization made a quiet, sustained decision to let a pattern continue without consequence. That decision ends today. The investigation covers both." She picked up her portfolio. "I wish you well in the process, Gloria. I mean that." She stepped through the door and onto the jet bridge. She did not look back. Her heels on the jet bridge floor were even and unhurried. The sound of them grew quieter as she moved away, and Gloria Tate stood at the exit of an empty cabin and looked at the space where Serena Vale had been standing. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about a woman in Dallas 8 months ago. She thought about the complaint that had come in after. She thought about the form letter response she had received from HR, which she had read once and filed, and not thought about again because it had said nothing that required her to think about it again. It had felt like resolution at the time. She understood now that it had felt that way because she had needed it to. She stood in the empty cabin for a moment longer. Then she straightened her jacket, walked back in, and began the arrival service checks. Because it was her job, for now. Derek Osei was at the curb at the arrivals level when Serena came through the sliding doors. 35 years old, former Navy, the kind of organized that ran in his family like a trait, not a choice. He had been with Serena for 6 years, long enough to read her face the way other people read text. He took one look at her and did not ask how it went. He opened the car door, she got in. He got in the other side. They sat in traffic without speaking. They had the kind of working relationship that could hold silence without filling it, built over 6 years of early mornings and late decisions and situations that required thinking before speaking. Derek waited. It was worse in some places than I expected, she said, and better in one. Tell me worse first. The gate agent flagged me. Unnecessary secondary delay. Standard enough. She paused. The passenger directly ahead of me at the gate was Leonard Moore. Derek was quiet. He was pulled aside for additional verification before I reached the counter. I watched it begin. I boarded the flight. She looked out the window. The Seattle overcast was low and heavy over the freeway. He was still at the counter when I walked down the jet bridge. A moment. Did he make the flight? Find out today. If he didn't, and I believe he didn't, I want him found before this afternoon ends. I want a call from me, not you, not the customer relations team, me. She paused. I want him on the next available flight to Portland. First class, our cost, and I want a written apology over my signature, not a template, actual sentences, done. He was already typing. Gloria Tate, 17 years, HR notification today, administrative leave pending external investigation. I'll have it sent before we reach the hotel. The external firm, no prior relationship with Clearway. Someone who will tell us what we don't want to hear. I have 2 names. I'll send them to you in the next hour. Use both. Cross-reference their findings. He nodded. Frank Alden. Pull his full complaint history for the last 3 years. Already requested. She looked at him. When did you request it? This morning, after you told me not to schedule anything before noon. She held his gaze for a moment. 6 years. She thought that sometimes. Just the number and what it had contained. The luggage attendant, she said, Ed. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the small folded piece of paper. Handed it to him. Amara Wells, 6th Concourse D Executive Lounge. She treated every person who came through that door the same way. I want her name in front of the head of guest services today. I want her recognized in a way that is real. Derek unfolded the paper, read it, folded it again, and put in his jacket. Done. The car moved north through the Seattle gray. The city going about its business, enormous and indifferent, full of people who had no idea that anything had happened 40,000 feet above them that morning in the first-class cabin of Flight CW 1887. There's one more thing, Serena said. What's better? She looked out the window. A man stood up, she said. Seat 2D, 69 years old. Said nothing that wasn't true and said it without performance. She paused, and a young woman in 3A had been recording since before the captain came out. Derek let that land. Civil rights attorney, Seattle, Simone Reeves. I know the firm. She'll send the footage through proper channels. I expect it this afternoon. I want our statement ready before the footage goes anywhere she didn't send it. How long do you need? 2 hours, maybe less. She looked at him. I've been writing it since we pushed back from the gate. He nodded, picked up his phone, went back to work. After a moment, Serena, she turned. He almost never used her first name in 6 years. When he did, it meant he was saying something as a person. Are you all right? She looked at him. The question sat there, honest and direct, the way a question sits when it comes from someone who actually knows you. She thought about the smaller champagne glass, about a boarding pass taken and held, about a man who read a document and went pale and said her name carefully, as if learning a new word. About Leonard Moore, still at the counter when she walked away. I'm fine, she said. Then after a moment, I've been fine for a long time. That part has never been the question. Derek looked at her for one more second. Then he picked up his phone and went back to work. The car moved through Seattle, and Serena looked out at the low gray sky above the sound and thought about what came next. She reached into her portfolio, found a pen, opened to a blank page, and at the top of it she wrote Leonard Moore. Not a template, not a form letter. Something with actual sentences. The car moved north, and she wrote, and the clouds held their position above the water. Patient, unchanged, the way the sky is always patient, waiting for someone below to finally decide that enough is enough. The statement took her 91 minutes to write, not because she didn't know what to say. She had known what to say since somewhere over southern Oregon, when the clouds had broken open and the Cascades appeared below. Dark and specific and real, and she had understood with complete clarity that what had happened on Flight CW 1887 was not a problem to be managed. It was a reckoning to be led. The difference mattered. She had spent 7 years watching organizations manage problems. The careful language, the measured apologies, the strategic silences that let a story exhaust itself before anyone was required to answer for it. She had been in enough boardrooms to know the playbook by heart. Acknowledge minimally. Apologize generally. Wait for the news cycle to move on. She was not going to do that. She sat in the hotel room with her portfolio open and wrote the statement by hand first. She thought better on paper. Her mother had taught her that, had taught not as advice but as demonstration. Writing everything by hand at the kitchen table in Birmingham, lesson, sand, grocery lists and letters to her own mother back in Mississippi, the pen moving slowly and with intention because the act of writing slowly was itself a form of respect for the thing being written. Serena wrote by hand, then she typed it. 930 words. No corporate phrasing. No, we take all feedback seriously. No isolated incident. And specifically deliberately, not the sentence she had heard most often in crisis communications meetings over the years. This does not reflect our values, because that sentence was the one she found most dishonest. It did reflect their values, not the values written on the wall plaques and the annual report cover pages, the operational values. The ones visible in what an organization actually did when it believed nobody important was watching, or thought nobody important was watching. She named the flight. She named the conduct, the boarding pass held without being returned, the secondary questioning at the gate, the removal demand made without verification against the central reservation system. She did not name the employees because the investigation was not yet complete, and she was not willing to substitute speed for fairness. But she described what they had done in plain language, specific enough that no one reading it could mistake it for vagueness. Then she wrote the sentence she had been composing since the jet bridge. The chief executive of Clearway Airlines was the passenger in seat 2A on CW 1887 on Tuesday morning. She boarded that flight under a name not associated with her executive role because she wanted to see, without announcement, how passengers who do not carry executive titles are treated on this airline. What she observed is consistent with a pattern of complaints this company has received and has not, until now, addressed at the level that pattern required. She read it back. She didn't change a word. 4 commitments followed, an immediate external investigation by a firm with no prior relationship to Clearway. Administrative leave for the personnel involved, pending the investigation's findings. A full audit of every closed passenger complaint from the previous 3 years, conducted by a second independent firm, and the publication within 90 days of aggregated complaint data broken down by route, by employee category, and by passenger demographic indicators, with quarterly updates to follow. Not in a legal footnote, on the public-facing investor relations page, where anyone with a browser could find it. She sent it to Derek at 3:47 in the afternoon with 2 words in the subject line, review and send. He called 4 minutes later. The board is going to have thoughts. I know. Legal is going to have more thoughts. I know that too. Insurance will not run this airline. No heat in it, just fact. Send it. A pause. Sending, Derek said. The statement went out at 4:15 Pacific time. She closed her laptop, set it on the desk, and sat in the quiet of the hotel room for a while, looking at nothing in particular, the way you sit after something has been set in motion that cannot be unset. Then she picked up her phone, and she dialed Leonard Moore. He answered after the 3rd ring. Careful. The way people answer numbers they don't recognize when they have learned that careful is usually the smarter choice. Mr. Moore, hi, so this is Serena Vale. I'm the CEO of Clearway Airlines. A longer silence, the kind that contains evaluation rather than absence. Is that right? Not a question, a decision being made. I'm calling because I was on flight CW 1887 this morning. Dallas to Seattle. She kept her voice steady, level without being cold. I was standing behind you in line at gate D7. The silence that followed was the longest yet. You were there, I was there, I watched you get pulled aside. I watched the line move. I boarded the flight while you were still at the counter. She did not offer an explanation immediately. She let the fact sit first, without cover, without context used as cushion, because the fact deserved to sit that way. I saw that. His voice was quiet, measured. I saw a woman watching, thought about saying something to you. A pause. Didn't I know? Why are you calling me? Because your letter has been on my desk for 11 days. And because I read it the night before I boarded that flight. And because what you wrote, what you described is the reason I was on that plane. She stopped for a moment. And because you missed your flight, and I walked down that jet bridge anyway. And I need you to hear that from me directly. Silence. Not cold, not forgiving, just present. Clearway has sent me apology letters before, he said finally. I know. I read those too. They all say the same thing. They do. This is not one of those calls, Mr. Moore. I'm not calling from a script. I'm calling because you wrote 4 pages on notebook paper and mailed them to a company that had disappointed you twice before. And that takes something. I want you to know that I read every word. A long pause. My daughter waited for me, he said. She took the whole day off work. I know. I'm sorry. She's used to it. Quiet, without bitterness. Which was anything worse than bitterness. The flatness of someone who has filed an experience into the place where things go when they've stopped being surprising. She shouldn't have to be, Serena said. No, he said, she shouldn't. I'd like to arrange a flight for you. Whenever works for you. Tomorrow, if possible. Portland first class at our cost, and I'll be writing you a letter. Not a template, my own words, my own signature. A pause. All right, he said. 2 words, but different from the first 2 words he had said. Less careful or careful in a different direction. Mr. Moore. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Your letter ended with a sentence. About 40 years of flying. About never getting used to the feeling. She paused. I want you to know that I haven't gotten used to it either. The silence this time was different, softer at the edges. Are you saying what I think you're saying? He asked. Yes, she said. I am. He didn't respond right away. She heard him breathing on the other end of the line. Taking his time. Then I look forward to your letter, he said. You'll have it by Friday. All right, Miss Vale. Safe travels, Mr. Moore. She set the phone down on the desk and sat in the quiet hotel room looking out at the Seattle gray over Puget Sound and thought about 4 pages of notebook paper. The handwriting that had started neat and gone looser by the 3rd page. The last sentence written by a man who had learned not to expect much and had written anyway. She reached for her pen, opened her portfolio to a clean page, and she started the letter with actual sentences. The statement went public at 4:15. By 6 that evening, Derek had sent 3 updates. Board member responses varied and loud, as predicted. A note from the general counsel using the phrase significant legal exposure 4 times in 2 paragraphs, and a single line 2 analysts have called. Neither is downgrading yet. She read all 3. Replied to none of them that night. The footage went public the following morning. Not because Simone Reeves posted it. She had done something more deliberate. Sent it directly to Clearway's executive office via certified email, with a cover letter on her firm's letterhead timestamped at 4:41 the previous afternoon. Professional. Precise. The 3rd paragraph noted the footage was shared in good faith and that her firm was available for any legal or structural matter that might follow. By the time the footage reached wider circulation, through a reporter who received it from the man in row 5 who had filmed openly, Clearway's statement had already been out for 17 hours. The story was not what the airline had done. It was what the airline had decided to do about it. Comment sections filled. The clip of Hal Briggs reading the memorandum and going pale moved with the speed of things people recognize immediately. Things that put a name on something they've seen, but couldn't quite articulate. The response was not simple. Some people saw accountability. Some people saw theater. Some would never be satisfied by anything short of the building burning down, and some would defend Briggs regardless of what any footage showed. That was fine. She was not making decisions based on comment sections. She was making decisions based on Leonard Moore's letter. The woman in Dallas. The young man in Chicago told his business class ticket looked suspicious. The doctor in Houston asked whether she could read the safety card in English. The stack of files that had been on her desk for 3 months. The stock opened the next morning down 1.9%. By 11, it had recovered to flat. By close, it was up a 1/4 point. By the end of the week, up 3.6. 2 analysts who had drafted downgrade notes withdrew them by Wednesday morning. One published a short commentary by the weekend. Clearway had demonstrated something the aviation industry had been avoiding for 2 decades, and investors appear to understand the difference between a liability managed and an integrity demonstrated. Serena read it. She appreciated the thinking. She also understood that measuring this moment by stock movement was precisely what she was trying to move the organization away from. The stock price was a side effect, a welcome one, but a side effect. That same week, in the executive lounge at Dallas-Fort Worth, a young woman named Amara Wells arrived for her 6 a.m. shift and found an envelope in her employee mailbox. She almost set it aside. Enveloped employee mailboxes were usually scheduling notices or benefit updates, the kind of thing you opened during your break, if you remembered. But her name was handwritten on the front, not printed. Handwritten, she opened it. It was a formal notification of recognition, Employee Excellence Award, Q3, nominated by the Executive Office. 1 paragraph, clean language. Her name spelled correctly. At the bottom, a handwritten note, 3 lines. You treated every person who came through your door the same way on Tuesday morning. You didn't know anyone was watching, that's the whole point. SV Amara read it twice, then a third time. She set it on the counter, looked at it for a moment. Then she folded it carefully, put it in the pocket of her uniform jacket, and went to make coffee for the first passenger of the morning. She didn't know what SV stood for. She didn't look it up. It didn't seem like the point. The investigation findings arrived 10 weeks after the flight. The external firm, a workplace equity consultancy based in Chicago, no prior relationship with Clearway, selected specifically because they had a reputation for saying what clients did not want to hear, submitted a report of 209 pages. Serena read all of it. She read it over a weekend at her kitchen table in Dallas, black coffee, no interruptions. The way she read things that mattered, start to finish, not looking for the summary, not skipping to the recommendations. The full thing, because the full thing was what she had asked for, and anything less would be a way of managing her own discomfort, which was exactly what she was trying to stop doing. The report named patterns, not individuals, patterns. The way complaints from certain passenger demographic categories were more likely to be closed without action than complaints from others. Not always, not universally, but consistently enough to constitute a pattern that no reasonable person could attribute to coincidence. The way specific routes had complaint rates 3 times the company average. The way the standardized responses to complaints had, over time, become indistinguishable from each other. The same sentences, slightly rearranged, regardless of what had actually been reported. 3 employee names from the complaint system appeared 5 or more times each in the 14-month window reviewed. 2 were already on administrative leave. The third was a gate agent at Denver International who had, by the time the report was submitted, requested a voluntary transfer to a back-of-house scheduling role. The request had been approved 2 weeks before the report arrived. Serena noted this without satisfaction and made a note to follow up on Denver specifically. A voluntary transfer was not an investigation. It was a man walking sideways out of a situation. She needed to understand what had happened in Denver the same way she needed to understand what had happened at Gate D7. She also noted, and this was the part she sat with longest, the section of the report that addressed organizational factors, not individual conduct, organizational decisions. The report documented a decade-long pattern of resolving complaints at the lowest possible level of intervention. Not because anyone had decided that pattern should exist, but because it had become the path of least resistance, and nobody with sufficient authority had ever looked at the accumulated result and decided the result was unacceptable. That section was about her, in part. She did not look away from it. She read it twice, made notes in the margin. And then she closed the report and sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of a Sunday morning and let herself be uncomfortable with what she had read for a while. Because she had decided a long time ago that being uncomfortable with something and do nothing about it were 2 different responses, and only one of them was acceptable. She knew which one. Hal Briggs's administrative leave became termination at 11 weeks. He did not file a wrongful termination claim. His attorney had reviewed the footage, reviewed the audio recovered from the interphone system, and advised him that there was no viable claim to bring. The conduct was documented. The documentation was clear. He did not fly commercially again. He moved to a smaller city, a quieter life. He had 29 years in commercial aviation and 4 gold stripes on a uniform that now hung in a closet. Whether he sat with what he had done, In the early mornings before the day filled up, in the particular quiet that comes when the noise of a career has stopped, was not something anyone outside his own thoughts would know. Some men do that work. Some build a story in which they were not quite wrong. Both are human. Serena did not spend time speculating about which kind of man Hal Briggs would turn out to be. She had other things to spend time on. Gloria Tate's case took longer because the investigation was not only about Flight CW 1887. It covered the 4 prior complaints in her file, the 2 that Biddies had resolved with refresher training that hadn't changed anything, the 2 that had been closed without action, and 7 commercial complaints that surfaced during the broader audit. Incidents that had been filed, processed, and set aside in the years before anyone was cross-referencing names. 11 incidents over 4 years, 1 name. Gloria's employment was terminated at 12 weeks. She did not appeal. She moved out of Seattle. Serena did not know where. She thought about Gloria sometimes. Not with anger, which had never been the dominant feeling. With something more like recognition. The acknowledgement that a person can spend 17 years in a career and make choices undecided that accumulated amount to something they will have to carry somewhere after the career ends. Whether Gloria ever examined those choices, whether she ever sat in her own kitchen on a quiet night and asked herself the questions that needed asking, Serena genuinely did not know. She hoped so, not for her own sake, for Gloria's, because carrying that weight without examining it has no end date, and Serena had seen what examined weight did to people over time. She had seen it in enough board meetings and enough performance reviews and enough conversations that ended just before they reached the part where the truth was. She hoped Gloria found her way to the examination. Frank Alden did not wait for the investigation to reach him. He walked into the HR office at Dallas-Fort Worth 2 days after the statement went public. He sat down across from the HR director and said, in the careful voice of a man who had not slept well in 48 hours, "I know what this is about, and I'd like to talk about what I did and what I think I should do next." The HR director called Derek that afternoon. Derek called Serena. She was quiet for a moment when he told her. What did he ask for? Reassignment. He doesn't want to work passenger-facing anymore. He's asking about back-of-house operations, scheduling, logistics. She considered. Offer it, with conditions, 6 months supervised transition, equity training, real training, a full program, not a half-day module. Documented review at the end of the 6 months, done, and Derek note in his file that he came forward voluntarily. Before the investigations reached him. She paused. That matters. It doesn't erase anything. But it matters. I'll note it. She set the phone down and looked out the window of her office at the Dallas skyline in the afternoon light and thought about the difference between people who waited to be caught and people who walked through the door before anyone came looking. That difference was not absolution, but it was the point. And she had learned over 7 years of running something that data points about character were worth keeping. She pushed through the terminal doors into the November air. The sky over Dallas was wide and clean, the particular blue that arrives after a cold front moves through. The kind that has no weather in it, just space. Her car was at the curb. She got in, closed the door. Sat for a moment before telling the driver to go. She thought about one thing, not the board call at 2 o'clock. Not the legal briefing Thursday. Not the 147 recommendations from Simone's audit that still needed to be tracked and verified and built into something that would hold past the news cycle, past the quarterly reports, past the moment when the story stopped being interesting and the actual work began. She thought about Amara Wells, 26 years old, 6 a.m. shift, making coffee for strangers before most people were awake, treating every person who came through the door the same way. Not because someone was watching, not because there was a policy that said to, but because that was the kind of person she has decided to be. That was the whole of it, really. Policies could be written. Training could be mandated. Investigations could be conducted and findings could be published, and commitments could be made in 930 words on a public-facing web page. All of that mattered. But none of it worked without Amara Wells deciding at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday to bring coffee to a stranger in a corner of a lounge and leave her alone when she wanted to be alone. Serena thought about that for a moment. Then she told the driver to go, and she went back to work. because there was quite a lot of it left, and she had always known how to work.